All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we have a mixed EDI and sustainability talk about the future today, and two speakers will join the table, let's say, Anna Puglisi and Fatemeh Zahra Majidi. Sorry, Fatemeh, I actually don't know how to pronounce your surname. So without further ado, because we have two talks, I would say Anna starts. We were thinking that questions can be deferred till the end of both talks, but if you have urgent matters during the presentations, you can write in the chat. All right, Anna, you can start.
Yes, so thank you, Maura. I'll share the screen. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for being here to listen to me. And especially thank you to Fatemeh and Laurent for the invitation to give this talk. So today I want to talk about astronomy in the 2040s, but from a slightly different perspective. So not through telescopes, instruments, or data sets. I mostly want to focus on the communities and institutions that will make that science possible. And this talk is largely based on a recent white paper that we submitted to the ESO Expanding Horizon White Papers call, but I thought I'd also use it to reflect on the broader philosophy behind it. And I also want to start with a short disclaimer that the reflections that I'm about to share are more on collective responsibility. And what I'm going to say is by no means about blaming individuals. It's about looking at the systems that we inherit collectively, that we maintain, and that we can choose to change. So we are in a remarkable era for astronomy. We have Rubin, Euclid, JWST, VLT, and ALMA that are already reshaping our view of the universe, and the ELT that is approaching completion. In this moment, ESO has asked the astronomical community what the next transformational ground-based program should be. And I think that this creates the perfect moment to ask a related question. What kind of scientific communities and institutions will be able to sustain that ambition? At the same time, astronomy is not developing in isolation. It is taking shape in a world that is marked by geopolitical instability, climate crisis, economic uncertainty, institutional fragility, and growing social polarization. And those tensions inevitably shape what science we do and how we do it. Those pressures also reach the individual level. Economic uncertainty means more precarity, fewer resources, and understaffed institutions. For many people, this creates instability in both career and personal life and can contribute to burnout. We can already see the effects of all of this in very concrete ways. For example, in the UK, where I live, universities and research institutions at large are facing financial pressure, restructuring, job insecurity, and increasing competition for limited funding. Those pressures affect departments, research groups, staff, and long-term planning of our research. So while the scientific ambition is expanding, many of the institutions that support it are becoming more fragile. This is why I think that the ESO Expanding Horizon call is not only a technical exercise, but also a societal and institutional challenge. And to understand why, I think it helps to look at how astronomy itself has changed. In general, astronomy has always evolved through technological ambition, but the scale of that ambition is now very different. We moved from an era where small teams could make major discoveries at local observatories to one of advanced telescopes, sometimes even distributed across the globe. Those modern facilities now operate through long-term international ecosystems. They include data centers, pipelines, archives, software infrastructure, and increasingly large datasets. So the systems require both machine power and highly specialized human expertise. Therefore, this makes astronomy deeply infrastructural these days. And naturally, the communities that produce the science have expanded too. Major discoveries today often emerge from collaborations that involve hundreds and sometimes even thousands of people across dozens of institutes worldwide, And this makes modern astronomy also much more relational and interdependent than ever. But those large collaborations are not experienced equally by everyone. And there are many barriers that can prevent meaningful participation. For example, caregiving responsibilities, disability and health, financial constraints, unsafe political or legal environments, and fragmented communication structures. Those conditions can shape who can show up, who can stay connected, who can be visible, and ultimately who gets to remain in science. Also, many early career researchers are asked to invest years into future facilities and long-term collaborations, while living on short-term contracts and growing uncertainty. This can create a very difficult choice between long-term scientific contribution and immediate survival. And this is not only a human problem, it is also a direct loss of expertise, continuity, and scientific potential for the field itself. Also, expertise, infrastructure, and resources tend to concentrate within already well-resourced institutions and collaborations. Over time, this shapes who gets visibility, access, influence, leadership opportunities, and scientific authority. So while participation may formally remain open, meaningful access is still uneven. Astronomy is also increasingly intersecting with questions of land, environment, culture, and local communities. Many major facilities are located in places of deep cultural, environmental, and historical significance for local and indigenous communities. But those communities very often are not meaningfully included in the decision-making from the beginning. And this can unintentionally generate harm and long-term distrust. Not because those communities are necessarily opposed to science, but because science has very often arrived as something that has been decided elsewhere. Also, in collaborations that involve hundreds of thousands of people, the scientific production becomes collective and distributed. But our system of recognition often struggles to keep up. So who receives visibility? Which form of labor remains scientifically legible? And which contributions become easier to overlook? In this context, the technical infrastructural labor can easily become invisible or under-recognized. But software development, pipelines, archives, and technical support, as well as data infrastructure, are not just support work. They really are part of how science is produced. And here in this context, I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to briefly highlight the Behind Astro initiative, which is a community-driven initiative that advocates for stable funding for the people who make large astronomical projects function. And I've just added the link here on my slide. So if you want to find out more, just go at that link. You can also sign up to support the initiative. Back to my talk. The final point that I want to make is that sustaining healthy scientific communities also require essential labor that includes mentoring, conflict resolution, codes of conduct, community care, and that labor often happens on top of scientific duties. This is time-consuming, emotionally demanding, and very often undervalued in hiring, promotion, and evaluation. And it often falls disproportionately on early career researchers and marginalized people. I think that science should ultimately serve people and society. Yet astronomy continues to expand technologically while becoming increasingly unsustainable for many of the people who produce it. And this creates a growing disconnect between scientific ambition and human sustainability. And yet, in this context, we keep pursuing scientific excellence and increasingly transformational projects. But I think that it's worth asking the question of what will scientific excellence actually mean in the 2040s? How do we measure the success of a facility? And those are not easy questions to answer. Of course, publications matter, citations matter, technological ambition matters. But I think that if those are the only things that we count, we risk optimizing science around visibility, productivity, extraction, and overperformance. And most importantly, we miss the costs that are hidden behind those metrics, which are burnout, exclusion, loss of talent, concentration of power, and erosion of trust. This is where equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging can become central. If modern astronomy is increasingly relational and interdependent, then the conditions under which science is produced can be part of the scientific quality itself. EDI and belonging are ways of asking what kind of scientific ecosystems we want to build, evaluate, and sustain. And in this sense, those are not separate from excellence. They are part of what long-term excellence will require. And when people can participate meaningfully and sustainably, better science becomes possible. Now, we have already many important ED&I structures in academia and large collaborations. We have working groups, code of conducts, visibility initiatives, representation efforts, and community guidelines. Those are really essential for safety, accessibility, harm reduction, visibility, and community support. And many people have fought hard to make them exist and to sustain them in time. But those structures are often asked to repair conflict after scientific structures have already been built. And I believe that this may limit their potential for deeper systemic change. So what I'm arguing here is that equity should not only support the structure, it should help shape the structure itself. So when ESO asked the community what scientific questions should shape astronomy in the 2040s, we responded by asking this connected question: what structures will allow this ambition to be realized sustainably and equitably? Our first idea is that formal access is not the same as meaningful access. Equitable participation requires redistribution, onboarding, training, and recognition mechanisms to be designed from the beginning. Otherwise, differences in institutional capacity, expertise, and available time will inevitably contribute to shape who can actually benefit from those future facilities. Governance structures such as open calls, predictable rotation, co-leadership models, and clearer pathways into leadership can help redistribute scientific influence, visibility, and long-term authority. The aim here should not be only to diversify who leads, but also to make leadership more shared, transparent, and accountable. And this can then strengthen creativity, participation, and the quality of collective decision-making. Also, EDI and community structures need to be integrated, resourced, and institutionally recognized. Those roles should be diverse, rotating, and distributed so that the burden does not fall repeatedly on the same early career or marginalized people. And we need to actively address the EDI penalty where people who sustain the community become less visible as scientists. Also, regular surveys, transparent reporting, and accountability structures can help identifying emerging inequities. They allow communities to understand where participation, access, or well-being are breaking down and to respond before harm becomes normalized. Meaningful engagement with local and indigenous communities also needs to happen early. Those conversations shape trust, legitimacy, environmental responsibility, and the social license for large scientific infrastructures to operate over decades, moving towards collaborative rather than extractive models of science. Finally, no single mechanism can fully represent the diversity of experiences across collaborations of this scale. Large collaborations, therefore, need multiple and accessible channels for community voices to be heard, especially those voices that are often marginalized or less visible in formal decision-making spaces. Ultimately, I believe that ED&I principles should not be treated as soft additions to scientific infrastructures. They shape who participates, who remains in science, who gains visibility and influence, and what kind of science becomes possible. So this is not only about making science more welcoming. It is about asking what kind of scientific community we're building, who it serves, and what forms of labor, knowledge, and belonging it depends on. In other words, I think that this is part of rethinking the philosophy and social contract of science itself. Those considerations directly support more traditional definitions of scientific excellence. Sustainable and equitable scientific ecosystems are naturally going to be more resilient, more creative, and better able to retain talent and expertise over long time scales. And I think that this discussion also matters behind astronomy. Public trust is not built only through better science communication. It also depends on whether scientific institutions are seen as representative, accessible, and responsive to the societies they serve. And if science becomes increasingly disconnected from the societal, economical, and political realities around it, that distance can become a source of mistrust. So for this reason, I think that how we organize participation, access, and representation within science matters beyond the scientific community itself. Now, I'm at the end of my talk, and in the spirit of the white paper, I do not want to present conclusions, nor this talk as a final answer, but more as a starting point for a broader collective discussion. So what I hope I started to do is to shift the focus from the question of how do we maximize scientific output to what kind of scientific ecosystems are worth sustaining. And if those ideas resonate with you, I would really love to hear your feedback and start a conversation. And beyond the Q&A that we're going to have afterwards, please do feel free to get in touch. My email is here on the slide. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you like, I would love for you to add your name to the endorsement form that I linked here via this QR code. This would help us make visible that many people across the community are thinking about those questions and care about the future direction of scientific culture. Because I think that ultimately the future of astronomy will depend not only on the telescopes we build, but also on the communities that we choose to nurture and sustain. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anna. So I guess we can go on with Fatemeh straight away.
So this is the second part of the talk. For everyone who's wasn't there when Maura was doing the presentations, I'm Fatemeh Zahra Majidi. I'm a postdoc fellow at A4E, and I'm having like multiple roles within YAO as well. So this is another paper that we submitted to ESO's Expanding Horizon 2025 call, and as you can see, it is about how to build ESO's next big telescope sustainably. So the lead author for this paper was Laurent. She is absolutely the best person to present this paper, but she is not around, so I'm the person who is fortunate enough to present this work. And you can also see some other names who might be like also on this call as well, and they contributed to this paper, so we collectively submitted this. And this has a very relevant content because when we saw the call, so you know, like the context of this call was plenty scientific. It was about what could be the next transformational ESO facility that can enable sciences which are not accessible before 2040s. So when we saw this call, we just thought that, okay, if you're going to build a very big project, let's say that it comes with the environmental risks and you have to be careful about some guidelines that we need to propose, etc. For this to be a successful project, like also from a sustainability aspect. So we felt a little bit of urgency to submit this paper, although no one asked for it. The call was completely scientific. And the paper starts with a very valid question. It is about how can we continue to explore the universe while we're sitting aside and seeing our only home burn? We already know as scientists that there is no planet B for mankind. And as many of us know on this call, astronomical facilities are accounting for the majority of our community's carbon footprint. So it is one of these aspects that we can attack pretty validly in terms of sustainability. Also, it reinforces the fact that one of the selection criteria for the next big facility of ESO is sustainability alongside scientific drive and organizational ability. So, I mean, it is one of the 5 major selection criteria. The other one is, again, like as many as you on this call know, like this situation is bad. So, I mean, Sustainability, as defined by the UN as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, is already under the threat. 7 out of the 9 planetary boundaries that have 7 out of 9 have already crossed the safe boundaries, and the other 2 are not doing that well as well. So, because this concept is quite relevant for this talk, I'm going to review all of these 9 planetary boundaries. So, the first one is climate change that we traditionally measure by the atmospheric CO2 concentration. The second one is the biosphere integrity, which is biodiversity loss and extinction rates. So, some of you already know we are already at the 6th mass extinction event. The third one is the land system change, which is the conversion of forest into agricultural land, and this will directly impact the carbon cycles and habitats. Number 4 is the freshwater change, so both blue water and green water are at the danger zone already. The number 5 is biogeochemical flows, which is like self-explanatory. It is mostly due to the heavy use of fertilizers. Number 6 is novel entities, all of those entities and pollutants that did not exist before we entered the big picture. So the man-made polluters like plastics, chemical, pesticides, nuclear waste. The other one is the aerosol loading, which is atmospheric particles, smoke, dust, or pollutants that affect the cloud formation. This has been considered to be crossed regionally. So it has been crossed regionally in East and South Asia. So, for example, a very good example of this is China due to heavy industrialization. But let's face it, like China is not another globe. We are all evolving together. So this is all like accelerating global warming altogether. The other one is ocean acidification. The other one, this is like safe, but this is like nearing the danger zone again. We have ozone depletion. Some of you might be remembering this, that we had the problem of the thinning of the ozone layer, but according to the Montreal Protocol, like thanks to that protocol, this one is recovering. Before diving deep into the talk, I'd like to just set the tone for this talk. So whenever we're doing some advocacy for nature, if we are proposing some guidelines, we are not saving nature in any ways. We are just advocating for ourselves. Nature, with or without us, it will move on, it will exist. Planet Earth will continue with or without us, so we're always saving ourselves. Same thing is going for astronomy. Right now that we are doing astronomy, astronomy is a part of human culture. Like I gave a talk very recently about astronomy in Iran, and we have astronomy since Zoroastrianism. So, with or without us, again, astronomy will continue as part of the human culture. What we are advocating for is for preserving the community of professional astronomers and also preserving and advocating for our profession, because we need to be sustainable in order to exist in the workplace and business, let's say. Funniest story, astronomy also occupies a dual position in this context, so it is both a contributor to and also a casualty of climate change. In this context, astronomy-related activities like contribute significantly to climate change via ocean acidification, aerosol emission, and also freshwater use. But again, it suffers from the very same factors. So, for example, like many observatories can suffer from extreme weather change events like wildfires. And then again, like atmospheric changes that might abruptly impair our observations. So again, like it is good to, when we want to talk and open discussions about sustainability, we can always like attack the problem of, are you building the observatories in a sustainable way? Because you might know this already, both ground and space-based telescopes are the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions. So according to a study done in 2022, they're emitting 1.2 megaton CO2 equivalent per year only in 2019. And in order to be aligned with the Paris Agreement, we need to decrease the number of astronomy infrastructures by 3% per year and also double the decarbonization of the existing facilities. So several of the ESO initiatives are aligned with these goals, actually, in the last decade. One of the best examples of this is the installation of the photovoltaic arrays at Paranal and Lucila that led to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from electricity consumption by 50% between 2016 to 2022, which was impressive. And this is no exaggeration. ESO is setting the tone for other observatories, at least in the Western world. So plenty of other observatories follow this trend. So for example, Simon's Observatory is planning to replace its Diesel electric generators with a larger scale photovoltaic power plant. Noir Lab is aiming to expand its photovoltaic arrays where Gemini South and where Rubin Observatory are. So by 2027, 100% and 60% of the electricity consumption of these observatories will come from renewables. Then also Keck Observatory has committed to a climate action plan to reach net zero emissions by 2035. So all of this is good and impressive, but we should take into account that new facilities absolutely should not undo all of the environmental progress that we had so far. So one of the good examples of this is ELT. So ELT requires so much power that it has actually outdone all the energy savings that we have done for parallel observatories so far. Because of this one project, the observatory will use more electricity in 2030 than what it did in 2016. And some folks might ask that why it uses so much power or energy in general, because size-wise, the primary mirror of the telescope is 39 meters wide. So in order to operate such a huge facility, you require huge motors. Cooling-wise, the mirrors and instruments should be kept at a specific cool temperature. Computation-wise, of course, you know that there is a massive, huge, enormous amount of data emerging from this telescope, so you need powerful supercomputers to run 24/7. You might also be getting the hint from all of these items that sustainability should be at the heart of building a facility. So right before the design, way early on. And how the future looks like. So we are even going further. You might know from National Academia's Decadal report that there are two categories of sciences that are the top priority of all space missions for 2020s up to 2030s, which is multi-messenger astrophysics. The other one is time domain astronomy. So the next generation astronomy is practically time domain astronomy. And although it is wonderful, I'm a huge fan of it. It just comes with generating massive data streams, rapid response observation, and then like also AI-driven analytics. So the scientific outcomes, the returns are extraordinary, but it also poses a significant challenge for sustainability. So already with a report or study that was done in 2025, we know that global data center energy consumption has a level of 1,000 terawatts hours in 2030, which is equivalent to more than 1/3 of the European Union households' energy consumption in 2022. So this is a serious challenge in terms of energy generation because we will need cooling water and also the environmental impact is undeniable. So right now, a medium scale data center is already using megawatts of power. If you want to do a comparison, this means an equivalent of energy consumption to a small town. So there will be a certain point in the operations of facilities that environmental footprint and water consumption of this computational ecosystem that's supporting all of these gigantic facilities will exceed that of the telescope itself. So data management, AI workloads, they're not helping either. So if we're going to use the conventional, traditional ways of data handling and management, etc., we're going to produce thousands to tens of thousands of tons of CO2 annually, which is catastrophic. So in order for ESO to be aligned with its commitments to sustainability, of course, it is beautiful to enable new sciences and then answer questions that were not enabled before. But it absolutely comes with environmental responsibility and risk. And again, sustainability should be considered way in advance, way before building all of these facilities. So what are some quick fixes that comes to mind? Of course, like the first one that we can think about is to leverage the power of renewables. So the base energy is clean. One of the simple examples of this is moving all of the servers to countries that use the nuclear power, for example, and nowhere else. Then the physical tech can advance. So instead of blast chilling the servers or continuous air conditioning, we can switch to more advanced techniques like liquid immersion. We can also start using the low power AI chips or dense storage, and we can switch to more smart engineering. Also, we can do some data triage in the sense of workflows and operations. So we can use a streaming interface or adaptive storage, and we really don't need to store all the data. We can develop pipelines that will tell us that what type of data we need, what are scientifically vital. So we only keep those and then get rid of the rest. And then, of course, sustainability is multifaceted. So there are way more comprehensive solutions that I'm going to introduce right now, like in a little bit. So one of these are life cycle assessments, which is like quite popular. The other one, if you have been engaged with any big facility, you know, FAIR principles. Social sustainability is something that Anna nicely touched on, but then again, like it has like its whole like Pandora box like happening. Like for example, one of the things that I'm not addressing today is how astronomy is affecting indigenous populations and groups, and how sometimes it can be closely connected to colonialism, which we are not going to discuss today, but it's an active problem that exists. The other solutions are reporting transparently and also regularly. And of course, if you have any type of long-term project, then you should have long-term sustainability goals as well. So we're going to address all of these topics from top to bottom. So first of all, sustainability, in order to make sense, should be taken into account as early as possible to be both more useful and informative. So one of the methodologies that address this problem is life cycle assessment. So for folks who don't know, this is evaluating the environmental impact of a project throughout its entire life cycle. This is not only for astronomy, it can also use for business model, workplaces, manpower, or even data centers, but it is also useful for some observatories. And some actual famous observatories have used this before. So ALMA and APEX are one of the best examples of this. WSD is a concept facility that most probably this or a smaller version of this is going to happen in the 2040s at least. This is a 12-meter aperture ground-based facilities, and it is conceived with a time domain mindset. And they have already hired a postdoc to work and do this type of assessment. So Laurent is in charge of this. She's actually doing this for WSD as her first postdoc. So for an observatory, LCAs can translate to taking into account raw material extraction to end-of-life processes. So it will take some inputs like material masses, energy consumption, transportation, manufacturing, recycling, transportation, etc., and then translate all of this into measurable environmental impacts across different categories that we discussed before, like, for example, climate change, resource use, chemical toxicity, etc. So during our advice giving paper, we actually advised ESO to do this assessment again for its approved concept facility in the future and move towards carbon neutrality. The other one is transparency. So, of course, we love to get the reports on the results of CO2 emission numbers, but if we are doing serious scientific studies, we need all of these results to be reproducible. So we want to have also all the parameters and data that led to those results. So this means, again, construction, energy use, heat generation, travel, personal support or like maintenance, etc. And as we said before, like data management and support, etc., like it's going to exceed the carbon footprint of that of the telescope itself at a certain point. So we also need to be transparent about data transport, storage, etc. And this is nothing alienated. These are all aligned with ESO's core values to provide clear and open communication with its users and community. So they're already having regular annual reports in terms of sustainability. The other solution that we are familiar with is applying FAIR principles. So for folks that don't know what FAIR principles are, this is ensuring that data products are findable, accessible, interoperable, and also reusable. And this should be embedded very early on in the design of the instruments, pipelines, archives, etc. And it will enhance significantly the scientific return of the project, and it also avoids duplication, unnecessary storage of the data, and again, processing of the poor data. In the planning phase, FAIR is again relevant for data management, metadata plans, and it should be integrated into technical requirements. Observational astronomers notice that FAIR is essential for data acquisition and reduction because you have to do a lot of file labeling, naming, and you should have robust version control, and you should also use community accepted formats. This is something that ESO has done an amazing job for, like so far. So we hope to see more of this in the future in the era of big time domain, gigantic facilities again. In terms of publication and preservation phases, again, I have been a very happy user of ESO's data as the PI or as a normal user. I think the data so far has been well documented, but again, we are talking about a very different level of data storage and archive. One thing that is quite big in this era is how integratable the data is, because one of the hot and trendy topics that we're discussing today, besides time domain astronomy, is also multi-wavelength range astronomy. So if we have big data coming from Raman, LSST, or such gigantic, like amazing facilities, for the future, let's say facilities, we also need to have data that is highly integratable and networked, especially if you're talking time working in the time domain ecosystem. So last but not least, we also like to actively track the sustainability progress. So we are living in a world that is rapidly changing in the global context, and also the global warming has been accelerating in the previous year. So we want to ensure that sustainable considerations are not left behind once the facility is actually operational. And I hope this talk has convinced you that tackling sustainability problems are quite challenging. It's a lot of work. It has to be at the heart and center of building a new facility, but it also is a big opportunity because it will start shaping a future where we can actually demonstrate that scientific ambition and environmental governance are mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. And so by this, I'm finishing my talk and happy to take questions for both talks.